Hi, I'm Arif, the creator of Redash. Today with Databricks Engineering. Here with me, Jesse.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jesse Whitehouse with Databricks Engineering. I was a customer success engineer with Redash for the past 2 years before this.
Today we're going to show you a demo of how you can query, visualize, and dashboard your lakehouse data with Redash. But before we dive into SQL and fun, let's get an overview of what Redash is. Redash is an easy-to-use open source dashboarding and visualization service for people who love SQL. With it, teams are better able to democratize sharing data insights within and across teams. I created Redash 7 years ago as a hackathon project, but it grew. Today, Redash is the result of an effort by a community of over 300 contributors. Every day, millions of users and thousands of organizations around the world use Redash to develop insights and make data-driven decisions. Now, with this intro, let's get an idea of what Redash actually is. At the heart of Redash is the query editor, a rich and familiar experience for those of you who love SQL without the complete formatting, snippets, schema browser, and much more. Once you get the results you need, you can visualize them. Every query can be visualized with a wide variety of visualizations and then grouped into a dashboard to tell a consistent story. These dashboards can be shared with your team and organization. As we announced earlier this year, Redash has joined Databricks, and we are making Redash part of the Databricks product. Integrated into your workspace, you get Redash augmented with Databricks-specific interfaces to make your life easier. In preview, we already have features like auto-populating your SQL endpoints, showing their status, and showing you your query history with helpful metrics to understand how they run. But more is coming. Worth mentioning that this is not only for Databricks. Redash supports over 40 types of data sources. So it's likely that whatever data source your organization uses, you can connect it to Redash. Now, let's check out how you can use Redash with Databricks. For this demo, we are going to analyze Redash usage with Redash and Databricks. Jesse, take the stage.
All right, thanks, Arik. Let's dive into the Redash on Databricks experience. Once it's been enabled for your workspace, you can use this application switcher on the lower left and just click for SQL Analytics. Anytime you want to go back to workspace from within the Redash experience, you can just use the same application switcher. This is what you're first going to see when you log in to the Redash experience. It should be pretty similar to what you have used if you've used open source Redash in the past. Really, the only significant difference in the look and feel is that we've moved the top nav bar over to the left, so it's more consistent with the Databricks experience. The options that you have along the left for dashboards, queries, and alerts are identical to the open source version, and then endpoints and history, those are distinct for the Databricks version, and we'll cover them in a bit. When you first log in, you'll see a list of your favorite dashboards and your favorite queries, and I'll show you how to add those in a minute. Really, the heart of the Redash experience for any SQL user is writing queries. So to write a query, we'll go into the queries area. Here's a list of all the queries we have access to based off of table ACLs, and I'll hit the New Query button. On the query editing screen, there's three portions, three components. The first is the query editor, where we can write our Spark SQL queries, and then down below is where the query results will appear when we execute queries by hitting this button. And then on the left, this is the schema viewer. It's kind of broken into three components of its own. One allows us to pick which cluster we're going to query, then which database inside that cluster, and then which tables and what fields on those tables are we going to query. So I've made some data available for this demo where we're pulling in visitor data that comes from the Redash SaaS platform that's been in operation for about 5 years now. We just have really two tables. We got data sources and events, but then we made a baby events table, just a sample that only includes a smaller subset of the big table. That way we can run really, really fast queries to figure out what insights we want. And then when we're done, we can swap out the name of the table and get it for all 5 or 6 years. So let's get started and write ourselves a query. We'll start by selecting browser, which is a struct. we'll get browser family and the count of those from the sample events table. I'll execute that by hitting the execute button. And here we can see Chrome's the most popular, but we have 80 different types of browser shown here. I'm going to try and make this a little easier to understand. I wrote a query snippet ahead of time that just allows me to case together a bunch of these different browser families. And we'll call that browser. And then I actually want to filter the data set too, so let's add a where clause. We'll add that same case. We don't need the alias, and then we'll just make sure that it's in this list of significant browsers I want to look at. This query is getting a little hard to look at, so I'm going to use this format query button, which should just make it a little easier to read. And then we'll execute. Awesome. And now we've got a limited list. We're just showing the top 5 most popular browsers that we want to look at. I'm going to use another query snippet to try and make a little more sense of this. This just allows me to show what percentage of the total is being represented by each kind. So it looks like 92.51% comes from Chrome. And then to make a little bit more information out of this, we'll add that exact same query snippet, but now we'll count distinct user IDs. And here we'll call this visit percentage. And here we'll say user percentage. And execute again. Oh, very interesting. The majority of both the users and the visits come from Chrome, but they're not tied in lockstep to one another. Let's go ahead and save this real quick. We'll just call this user visits detail. We'll add a tag here, say it's for the Data and AI Summit demo. And I should be able to add a description down below. Summarizes user browser families. That becomes searchable later as needed. I'm going to add a visualization to this by clicking that Add Visualization button. We'll just go by browser type, user and visitor percentage. And I don't need to sort the values because I kind of want to see them from largest to smallest, just like that. Perfect. Now, to make this a bit more interactive for a business user, we can add a couple more where clauses. Let's make a breakdown where we can see whether it is whether it's a mobile browser or not. So we'll check inside that struct for browser is desktop. And here, to make this interactive for a business user who doesn't want to write SQL, I'm going to insert a parameter using this button here, or I could hit Command P. And we'll make a parameter. These are just inserted into the query at runtime based off of the value that you choose at runtime instead of having to bake it into the query. So I'm gonna pick this type of parameter, which is called a drop-down list, but there are a few different kinds. We'll use a drop-down list with 2 options, true or false. And then let's just look at mobile browsers. Nice. Yeah, we can see that Safari is the most popular among the mobile browsers, probably from people using iPads. You know, that's a popular way to access Redash. And then if we switch over to the desktop side, we can see that those numbers are a lot more similar to what we saw overall. So now we've got a query, we've got a visualization, and we have a way to look at it with a little bit of configurability at runtime instead of having to edit SQL. The next thing we can do in Redash is to add it to a dashboard. Just like how we created a query by going to the query screen and hitting new query, we can go to the dashboard screen and hit new dashboard to do the same thing. So we'll hit usage statistics up at the top. And now we can pick whether we want to add either a text box or a widget to the dashboard. You can add either and as many as you need. Text box accept markdown, like this. You can add links too, as you would expect. But for now, I'm just going to use this to sort of format what's going to appear where on the dashboard. So that appears there. And now we can add a widget. This will be a searchable list of all the queries that I have access to, but here I've got user visits detail, which I just made. And you can have multiple visualizations per query within Redash. Here I just have the one on the query we just wrote, but there's also the table or the chart. So we'll pick the chart for now, and here we can figure out which place we want to source that parameter from. So let's just make this a little taller. There we go. You can see when I added that to this dashboard, it created this dashboard level parameter up at the top. I could, if I wanted to, also edit this parameter and just make that widget either disappear as a static value, or I could place it within the widget instead. This way, as I add more visualizations to a dashboard, I can change a bunch of them using the same parameter widget up at the top, or I can have them operate independently. It's one of the convenient features of Redash. We try to make it as useful as possible for people who don't know SQL, while as powerful as possible for people who do. I'll show you another type of parameter as well. Here we can add one more parameter in here. We'll just say let's do created at. Where created at is between, and we're going to add another parameter. And this one is going to use a date range type. So we'll call this date range. And you'll notice with the first parameter, there's just this one marker in curly braces, brackets. But with a date range, there has to be two. And these just get written into the query as one would expect. So we'll do this between date range start and date range end, like that. And now I can pick a date range. For now, let's just do the last 12 months. The data should be pretty similar, I would expect, because there's not much on the sample table. But now we've got two parameters tied to this query. And that's two ways that a business user could modify what they're seeing, either with the date range picker or with the mobile versus desktop change. So if we go back to the dashboard that we just made, you can see that there's two parameters. And as I was describing before, we can have some of them appear in the widget and some of them appear at the dashboard level, like this. All right, so as part of writing that query, you saw me use a couple of query snippets. I'm going to show you how those work just a little bit. I'm going to click on my profile down here under settings, and here's the query snippets. So one, for example, that I made was just a list of major browsers. And this trigger is what I type inside the query editor to tab autocomplete. I just used my initials and then browser families. You can see when I created the PCT trigger, there's a description of what it does. And within the definition of the snippet, you can see these $ and then curly braces, curly brackets. This indicates where the cursor is going to auto jump to after the query snippet has been inserted into the query. So because there's two markers here indicating the first insertion point, immediately after tabbing, I can type in two places at once. On the browser family case statement, I actually named these. One is called field. It appears twice. And then there's also a second insertion point called alias. So as you may recall, if I go in here and just type in PCT with autocomplete enabled, I have two carets shown right here. And so that types in two places. But if I was to do the JW browser family case, here I start with two values. And I had written browser.browserFamily. But when I hit tab again, it jumps me to the next insertion point that I defined within the query snippet. And that's how I was able to create that entire case statement with just a few key presses. This is really helpful once you've built up a pretty sizable library of them related to your database schema. It can save you a lot of time with writing your queries. Now, once you have a query, let's just say select count of star from event sample. We'll do this. I'm going to make myself a counter visualization. A counter visualization just shows like a single number. We'll call it total events. Just like that. And this becomes really nifty if I want to add it to my dashboard that we just made. It was called usage statistics. So we can go ahead and add it and even jump to the dashboard. You can see it here. I can change this, make it a little bigger. but I don't want this number to get stale. So I'm going to jump to this query. We'll call it total events, just like that. I'll add it to my favorites like this. We'll mark it as being associated with this demo. Let's refresh that data. Now, this is static data. It's not going to change because this was just a sample, remember? But when it's tied to live data, that number of events is going to be increasing every second. And I don't want my dashboard data to get stale. So one thing I can do is to add a refresh schedule so that Redash can rerun this query in the background. That way, when my business users visit the dashboard or when I'm navigating through the app, I'll be able to see a recent query result instead of having to go through and manually hit this refresh button, or from the dashboard screen, hit this refresh button to make that happen. I do that down here on the lower right with the refresh schedule. And I can, it's pretty configurable. I can make it run every minute. I can make it run every few hours. And I can make it run every day or every 30 days. And if I'm picking on days, then it will use my local time zone, but also show me the UTC value. And I can pick what time of day I want it to run and if it should ever stop. This is really useful for trying to, make sure you manage your compute resources within Databricks. You can also set these schedules using the Redash API if you need to. And we're working on a bulk editor to make it a little easier to edit this for multiple queries at once. One nice thing is that once you have a refresh schedule tied to a query, you can also make an alert for it. So here, I'm going to make an alert for total events, just like this. And what alerts will do is send you a notification if a metric returned by one of your queries either meets, exceeds, or falls below a certain threshold. So for example, I only have one column that's available from the total events query, and the top row value is this one. So maybe I want to know if it goes one higher than that. Go ahead and send me a notification. I could even use a custom template and said, you did it. Good news. And make an alert. And then I can have an email sent to me. There are other destinations that can be added, although we don't have them configured on this workspace. They're covered inside our documentation. You can add notifications that go through a Slack channel, to PagerDuty, to a generic webhook, to Zapier if you use that. And it is flexible, so if you want to add more in the future, we can accept pull requests from the open source community or even find other services that we can send those notifications to. In this case, it will tell me if there's no refresh schedule, which I didn't actually add. If I jump back to the query and add one, then that should disappear. Here, we'll make this run every 15 minutes. And then if I go back to my alerts, you can see that it's scheduled to run every 15 minutes, and it would send me an email if I tick this. If I don't tick this, then it can still run and evaluate, but no notifications are going to go through. Redash has a lot of features that are covered pretty extensively in our documentation, and we try to make this as easy to access as possible. So if you're ever confused or you don't know what to do next, you can click the question mark down here, and this will be a cloud-specific set of documentation for you. So if you're hosted in AWS, you'll have AWS-specific documentation, and likewise for any other cloud. Now, I mentioned when we started that we have these two other screens. We have endpoints. These show the SQL endpoints that are running, their size, and there's a management interface for them. So you can see my testing interface here, and the shared endpoint is what I've been using up till now. And then we also have a query history so that we can see exactly how the resources on that SQL endpoint have been used. You can see what query I ran. This is me. You watch me run this query. See me running the query. You can see the endpoint it ran against and who did it. Right now, this is filtered against my name, but if I remove this, I could also see what other users are doing. And of course, this is configurable using just group permissions and ACLs. So there's a lot that you can do inside Redash, and I only showed you a couple of visualization types. Switching over to another environment here, you can see all of the different types of visualizations that are currently supported. And we're actively working on adding more, like candle charts and horizontal bar charts. And, we use Plotly under the covers. So most things that are supported in Plotly, we're hoping to add here in the near future. A lot of these are different types of chart visualizations. So you can see, a mixture of line chart and bar chart and stacked bar chart. Here we've got a heat map or a scatter graph, right? Or a bubble chart. But it's not just the visualizations that are powerful. We also have really powerful tables. They do more than a typical table would. They can accept HTML inputs. So you can see I've got a bold tag that was manually selected in this case. I've got an escaped HTML tag. So you can see here it's being escaped and here it's not. We have live links if you want. Dates can, of course, be formatted and Booleans. And if you've got nested data source types, you can pull JSON directly and start exploring it directly within Redash as a nested structure. The table is smart enough to figure that out. You can also add, table searches. So if I was to go back to my, my query that I wrote before with the user visits detail, I can edit the table visualization. It's not just the chart with this edit visualization button. The table has it too, and I can pick which columns I want to use for search, for example. And then as I go through here and type Chrome, of course, it'll limit. If I wanted to sort of play around with this further, I could go a step further and just take out all of these and get down to that list of 80 browsers, but then see, Chrome Mobile, Chrome for iOS, Chrome Desktop, etc. Makes it very easy. So it's one of the nice things that you can do with tables inside Redash is you can make them a little bit more powerful than a typical table in a Viz tool. And of course, you can pull in pictures as well. Here you can see we've got a search table for demonstration purposes. We also have Geo Visualizations as shown here. These are getting better and better over time. We're adding more geographies for GeoJSON and etc. And of course, these are Sankey diagrams versus sunbursts. They basically show the same information, but in different ways. Here's the counters that we discussed before. The ones that show green and red are showing how a counter performed against a target metric. And then, of course, we've got a word cloud. We've got a box plot. We keep inside the documentation a list of which visualization types are supported at a given time. It's going to be inside the user guide under visualizations and under visualization types. So you can see how this changes over time and explore it. See what you can do today that you couldn't do yesterday. We're constantly adding new visualization types and improving the ones that we've got. And that's been a pretty simple walkthrough of the Redash experience on Databricks. Thanks so much for your time and attention, and back to Arik.
Thank you, Jesse, and thank you everyone for watching this demo. We are excited to bring Redash to Databricks, and we think you're going to love it. Jesse and I are available in the chat portal to answer any questions for the next few minutes. Thank you very much.